In our last video we left off in the 1400 block of military, and as we continue here we are looking at the 1500 block on the east side. And there's a couple things that we want to look at here. The first one, of course, is the hawk shop. And pawn shops are riddled with bad press and even worse reputations thanks to Hollywood productions tying pawn shops to seedy neighborhoods and bad dealings. Fortunately, the reality of the pawn industry couldn't be further from that. And Terry Orr has done a great job with this business here. It looks very professional, very upbeat, I think an asset to the community. It is said that a pawnbroker has to wear several different hats, including merchant, loan officer, banker, and even historian. I know the historian part is true. I know Terry likes history, he watches all these videos, and he's also contributed these next two pictures that we see on this video of what used to be here before Terry's place was here. The hawk shop was established at this location about 1991. Before that, it was Lay's furniture store. There could have been something in between, I'm not sure, but I know Lay's was there for a long time. We know from this advertisement alone they were there from the 1970s all the way back into the 1930s. As we zoom in, we can see what the store looked like in the 1970s. And then just above that, what it looked like in the 1930s. In the 1920s, there was an auto dealership at this location. Actually, there was a couple of different ones, but the one we want to look at is this one right here, Eldridge Wonnacott and Company. Wonnacott sold several automobiles out of that location, the Wills St. Clair, the Flint, the Durant, and the Star automobiles. And none of these are being produced today, they just didn't make it. The one that we actually want to look at today is the Wills St. Clair, for two reasons. One, it's a very interesting story, and two, this automobile was manufactured only 10 minutes from this location. No, not in Port Huron, but in Marysville. So why am I putting something about Marysville in this Port Huron video series? Well, actually it's because I want to. And I know there's many folks that watch these videos that are actually from Marysville. It's not that far. It's a good story, and I'll go off on another one of my tangents here. C. Harold Wills was one of the most significant figures in the history of the American motor industry. In the early years of last century, he was a catalyst who helped turn Henry Ford's ideas into reality, and though he had helped create a revolution in popular transport, he was best known for the precisely engineered luxury automobile that he created as a manufacturer. Born in 1878, Wills was the son of a Welsh immigrant who named his son Child Harris Wills. All his life, Wills tried, unsuccessfully, to hide his first name and sign himself as C. Harold or C.H. Wills. His boyhood ambition was to become a machine draftsman and designer, which he became. It was while he was working in that capacity that an opportunity came to him in 1902. When his friend Henry Ford, whom he had met a couple of years earlier, asked him to come and help him with the development of two racing cars, which Ford was building in order to create, hopefully, sufficient attention to attract backers for the car company, which Ford was attempting to start. He and Ford were a perfect match. Wills was a natural draftsman with the ability to see and correct problems at the drawing board stage. He would become America's greatest practical metallurgist, which means an expert in different metals, while Ford had an intuitive sense of design and a consuming vision of the need for a popular car. Ford could not hope to match the salary which Wills was receiving as a draftsman with the Boyer Machine Company, so Wills took on the Ford job in addition to his full-time employment. Like Ford, Wills had a seemingly inexhaustible capacity for work, and would happily labor all day and well into the night, with little more than a sandwich and a glass of milk at noon to sustain him through the long hours. In choosing Wills as his principal shop assistant, Ford had gone far toward guaranteeing the success of his own enterprise, for in the design of all the company models of the next dozen years, it is impossible to disentangle Ford's work with that of Wills, who people said was a genius. Both men had an intensely practical approach to automobile engineering. Not a bad thing at that early stage of the art, when trial and error was often the best way to solve a problem. Wills kept his distrust of textbooks throughout his career. "If it's in a book, it's at least 4 years old, and I don't have any use for it," he said. As the racing cars progressed, so his part-time job with the struggling Henry Ford Company occupied more and more of Will's waking hours. He and Ford would work far into the night in Ford's tiny, unheated first-floor factory. I use that term loosely. And when the early spring chill became too unbearable, and their numb fingers could no longer grasp a pencil or a spanner, Wills and Ford would put on boxing gloves and knock the heck out of each other until their circulation was restored. By the autumn of 1902, Wills was working full-time for Ford, and the racing cars proved so successful, especially when driven by Barney Oldfield, who is shown in this photo with Ford, that Ford began to attract the kind of financial backing he had been seeking. Will's metallurgical training allowed him to first grasp the importance of lightweight, strong nickel-chrome vanadium steel when building mass-production cars. Will's idea allowed Ford to build his Model N in 1907. Of course, Ford would later take credit for developing the alloy. When the infant company was looking for some kind of distinctive corporate symbol, the multi-talented Wills was equal to the occasion. Rummaging around in his attic at home, he retrieved a little printing set which he had used to make pocket money printing visiting cards when he was 15 or 16. Using the flowing typescript of the printing set as a basis, Wills designed the familiar Ford lettering, which is still used to identify the company. And later on, of course, they have the blue background behind it. But still using the same type of typeset that he got from this little printing set when he was a boy. Over the years, Ford's and Will's relationship grew distant and even hostile. Ford wanted to make his Model T to remain the same, except for a little updating, but that updating still had to be interchangeable with old parts. Wills was anxious for change and progress. He yearned to produce an entirely better engineered automobile. The final break came in March of 1919, when Wills walked out of the Ford factory with a severance payment of about $1.5 million. A few days later, John R. Lee, Ford's labor relation expert, also resigned, and he and Wills soon joined forces in a new motor manufacturing company, which was to build a car 10 years ahead of its time. For capital, Wills used $1.5 million severance pay, plus he had $4.5 million saved up in his own account, not so much from his investments with Ford, but his investments in the steel companies that made the vanadium steel. And that, along with whatever his partner put in, got enough to get started. And they started the Wills St. Clair Automobile Company. The St. Clair came from the St. Clair River. Wills added the letter E to the word Saint and E to the word Clair, thinking it probably gave it a little bit more class, St. Clair with the E's. One thing in common that all these ads that you've seen had in them, besides the car, was that there was always a picture of a gray goose, or geese many times, or would be more than one, in the ad. And the car was dubbed the Gray Goose. His cars would have the Gray Goose medallion on the front of them, and in some cases it would have the Gray Goose that would be attached to the radiator cap on top of the hood. Pretty classy looking. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. When Wills left Ford, he was capitalized enough with his $5.5 million to begin his own car company. His ambitions were far broader than that. Beginning in 1919, he embarked on a grand plan to build not just a factory, but an assembly plant surrounded by a full industrial colony, a contemporary planned community that ultimately encompassed homes for employees, a park, schools, and a business district. That place would be called Marysville. This is what Marysville looked like in 1919. It was a non-pretentious, sleepy village with a population of 300. The road you see here is actually Huron Boulevard, but back then it was Bartlett Road. And on the left here you can see a meat market and what looks like a little girl on the front porch. And as we pan down Bartlett Road, we come to the N&B sawmill at the end of the road, right near the river. And you can see not only the sawmill, but you can also see the ship that is either loading or unloading right behind it on St. Clair River. Here we can see the interurban that stopped just outside the post office on the corner of Bartlett and River Roads. Lumbering was the main enterprise in Marysville in 1919 until Wills decided that Marysville was the perfect site for a large automobile manufacturing center. Members of C.H. Wills and Company came to Marysville believing they would help to create the city of contented living, as it was touted by promoters. Shown here in 1919 are some of Wills' associates that took the train in to look Marysville over. Work started immediately. The Marysville Land Company was created and started improvements in Marysville in the autumn of 1919. Wills had wanted to build a community as well as automobiles, and he acquired almost 4,400 acres of land in order to control the growth of the village. The land company was responsible for installing sewers, grading gravel streets, constructing sidewalks, and building recreational facilities before the plant was opened. The Marysville Club, which is the structure at the left, established in 1905 as the Fisher Hotel, served as a restaurant in the Wills era. Here we see Wills talking to two of the employees working on the village. And in this photo here we can see that Wills is actively involved in the process. Here he's helping to build one of the community quarters for employees, a structure that reputedly took just one day to construct. These smiling ladies were pleased to lend a helping hand when Wills Recreation Hall was being erected in 1920. Marysville had attracted 2,000 persons, workers, and their families by 1921. 2 years earlier, the population had been only 300. The Wills St. Clair assembly line in 1921 produced the first cars a year later than the scheduled debut. The deluxe model, aimed at a very selective and limited market and priced at $3,400, received rave accounts from auto magazine writers. Using new technology that he had developed at Ford, Wills produced a lightweight and well-crafted car. One of the selling points of this car was the car was made of a new steel, even better than the steel that he had come up with for Ford Motor Company. The new steel was called molybdenum. Pretty hard word to say, and in the advertisements they even had it hyphenated so you could say it. And eventually it was just shortened to moly steel. It was very strong and lightweight, and it was used to put on all the bodies there in Marysville at the factory, but also many, actually all the parts that were metal were made with this steel. Ford Motor and Chevrolet were still using wood in their car bodies, and did until 1937 when Wills St. Clair patent ran out. This is what each of the employees at the factory in Marysville wore. It was a badge that says C.H. Wills Company. In 1921, this is what Ford Motor Company was selling. And in 1921, this is what Wills St. Clair was selling. And you can see there's quite a difference. That's why it's said that Wills St. Clair was 10 years ahead of his time. As we zoom in here, we can see the Grey Goose medallion on the front of the grill. And then, of course, as we come back out on the left side of these cars is what he called a courtesy light, which was a small spotlight fitted in the scuttle on the left side of the body and aimed backwards to cast a pool of light in the area of the rear wheel, and thus enable oncoming drivers to gauge the width of the Wills St. Clair. The wheels on the car were disc wheels, and of course up until this time all the wheels were spoke wheels, and people weren't quite ready for this. They looked big and clumsy and didn't know how safe they were. They trusted the spoke wheels a little more. Today, of course, we know that's not the case. Something the Wills St. Clair car did have going for it was the color. If you recall, Henry Ford says you can have any color you want from my factory as long as it's black. Well, Will St. Clair gave you some choices. It was available in 3 standard colors: Lady Mary Maroon, Newport Blue, and Liberty Green. Unfortunately, the car just didn't do well. A post-war depression and an imposing $3,000 price tag meant a rough start. By November of 1922, the Wills Company was $8 million in debt and forced into receivership. It was refinanced and the company resumed production in 1923, introducing a 6-cylinder engine and a new touring and roadster model. Wills did everything he could to promote his car, including endurance tests. He would advertise and publicize what his car could do along the open country. In this particular advertisement here, you see the endurance test going all the way from Portland to San Francisco. But the endurance test that he received the most publicity from was a cross-country test that went all the way from New York to San Francisco. The car was driven by Lewis Miller, and Miller beat the record by 7 hours and 44 minutes. The lapse time for the entire trip having been 102 hours and 45 minutes. Western Union checked the official time, and this 1925 ad shows the map of the United States with geese flying around it. The most remarkable thing a motor car has ever done. And as this newspaper article says, he beat the fastest express train making that route by 10 hours. He also made it without a single solitary mechanical adjustment of any kind during the entire trip, and without adding any water to the radiator. In recognition of his achievement, Wills gave him a Will St. Clair coupe. Unfortunately, endurance records were not enough to keep the company in business. On November 23, 1926, after producing more than 12,000 cars, auto production was halted and the company was liquidated. And in August of the same year, Chrysler purchased the former Wills St. Clair factory. Wills didn't retire. He probably could have. He had several patents out that made him a lot of money. But he went on to work for the design team for the Ruxton automobile. It was a front-wheel automobile, and another car that looked a little ahead of his time as well. I think you can see some similarities here. Ruxton was eventually taken over by Chrysler, and Wills went to work for Chrysler as a metallurgist. C. Harold Wills suffered a stroke and died on the last day of 1940, ironically at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. And it appears that Henry Ford Hospital is using the same logo as the car that Wills had in his little printing kit when he was a 16-year-old boy that he kept in the attic. C. Harold Wills was an auto engineer, but mostly he was a visionary. He had a vision for the automotive industry, and he also had a vision for the little town of Marysville that went from 300 to 2,200 population, and after they closed, back down to 700. In the Stedman Theater souvenir program from 1922. I get a kick out of it because it says Will St. Clair Company of, not Marysville, but Port Huron. Wow, we got all that from this. Well, the next time you go by this corner and look at the Hawk Shop, you can be reminded that this is where C. Harold Wills sold the car of his dreams. Well, we've run out of time again. But why don't you join me in the next video, and we'll just keep walking south down the block and see what there is to see.